This boy is chewing the most poisonous red millipede in the world because moments before he woke up, it killed his own mother, who was lying beside him. His jaws slowly tighten around the venomous millipede, and his eyes widen with sudden fear and rage. Each second feels endlessly long, and he realizes that this decision might be the last one in his life. Mom's face became very frightening. Her eyes were completely covered in red veins, and foam kept coming out of her mouth no matter how she called her. A deep, uneasy silence filled the room, and then, like a wave, her body fell asleep again. At that moment, fear and anxiety engulfed the boy. Gene Jagan was absolutely furious. After grabbing the poisonous millipede, he began to bite it with force. His teeth sank into the millipede's flesh, tearing its venomous legs and strong shell. Each bite was filled with rage and despair, and he didn't stop despite the danger. He was desperate because he couldn't save his mother. Immediately, an old man bursts into the room with the boy and the deceased woman, shouting the boy's name. He forcefully opens the door and looks very frightened. His eyes are filled with concern, and his breath trembles with excitement. But the first thing the old man sees is Gene Jagan, writhing in pain on the floor, eating a beetle. The old man is horrified and immediately cries out, wondering who could have committed such a cruel crime. His voice is filled with anger as he expresses his horror and dismay at the horrific scene. The old man rushes to the boy and lifts him by the neck. He immediately shouts for the boy to open his mouth because he doesn't want the boy to leave him. The old man insists that the boy must not leave them and should wake up quickly. The boy's face is terribly pale. His eyes are still filled with tears that continue to flow relentlessly. There are large bruises under his eyes, and traces of tears streak down his cheeks. Around his mouth are small spots of blood and saliva that have managed to seep out. His eyes have turned white. The old man tells Gene Jagan to swallow a golden-colored pill because the boy needs to remove the deadly poison from his body as soon as possible. If they don't do this in time, the boy will die. But then, behind them, a loud laughter of a man is heard, saying how sorry he is that the precious healing fire pill was wasted on such a pitiful and useless boy. Mangyu told the old man what he plans to do now because his stubbornness had led to the death of innocent members of his own family. He also mentioned that the old man should have listened to the man's words earlier. However, the old man responded that their White Flower clan of the medical school is a small but resilient faction with a history spanning 3 centuries. He added that they wouldn't yield to the poison school, which is known for engaging in killings. To this, Mangyu just shrugged and smirked, suggesting that they should first check if he's still alive because what's the point of fighting for it if all his loved ones have died? The old man immediately shouted that the man was despicable because if they thought that merely existing is life, they are no different from animals. The old man shouted that the White Flower clan would never bow to the poison school. But the man sighed heavily and told the old man that he is truly annoying. After all, the medical school and the poison school are, in part, of the same origin, and he urged the old man to stop his efforts. Mangyu also added that saving his grandson's life would be a tough task since he was bitten by a poisonous millipede. The man revealed that he deliberately released the precious red poisonous centipede into the room of the old man's daughter and grandson. A malicious grin spread across his face. The old man stared angrily at the man and wondered if, out of all the venomous beetles in the world, it had to be the poisonous red centipede. Even so, it was the deadliest among all venomous animals and insects. Mangyu told the old man that since he finally understood, he should leave right now because if he continues to resist, it will only mean more suffering for him. Mangyu asked if the old man had any final words. The old man picked up his grandson and exclaimed in amazement that his grandson had awakened. The exhausted boy weakly called for his grandfather. Mangyu chuckled unpleasantly and said that even though the boy was bitten by the red millipede, he still fought for his life. He knelt before the two of them and continued to watch. Mangyu noticed the boy crawling towards him and laughed. He found it amusing how the boy, who was about to die, still struggled until the very end. The man laughed, saying that the boy's love for life surpassed his love for his grandfather. Mangyu mockingly leaned forward toward the boy's body and said that unfortunately, they didn't have an antidote that could save him from the bite of the poisonous millipede. And besides, too much time had already passed. But then the man jerks, noticing that pieces of the most poisonous millipede are lying on his leg. Mangyu screams in horror because he couldn't have expected something like this to be in the boy's hand. Mangyu angrily shouted at the boy, calling him a wretch, and swung at him, but the boy's body was shielded by the old man, who took the blow on his back. Immediately, the man bent down to examine his leg, and a large red mark appeared on the old man's back where he was struck. Mangyu immediately begins to shout in rage because he has just been poisoned by the red millipede venom for which there is simply no antidote. The venom was spreading rapidly through his leg. Mangyu shouted at the man standing nearby to use his sword as quickly as possible. But his subordinate just looked at him in surprise. In his rage, the man ordered him to cut off his leg with his sword right now. At that moment, the old man slowly crawled toward the forest. The subordinate, with excitement and regret in his voice, asked his captain if he would be okay if he did it, to which Mangyu angrily yelled that they have no time for deliberation, and everything must be done very quickly. A loud cry of pain from the man was heard immediately. After Mangyu's leg was severed, someone from the subordinates informed the captain that the old man and the boy had disappeared somewhere. The man grumbled irritably at this news. Mangyu asked for help to get up because his second leg had been successfully cut off. Mangyu shouted in rage, asking why the subordinates were doing nothing and just standing there, and ordered them to immediately chase after them because they couldn't let them escape. By that time, the old man and the boy had successfully managed to break free and hide in a small cave. Grandfather Jin Jagan had laid down a makeshift bed of hay and dried grass for the boy. However, Jin Jagan immediately began to cough intensely. His grandfather began to watch his grandson. He immediately noticed that the boy had spit out the shell of the red poisonous millipede. The old man told his grandson that he had heard that eating the venomous shell of its owner could, with great effort, overcome the poison. Grandpa calmed down because it was possible that the boy might still survive and overcome the poison. But right after saying those words, the old man fell right next to Jin Jagan, and his dying thoughts were only about his grandson. He said in his hoarse voice that the boy must live no matter what, and that even if he, the grandfather, were to die now, the boy's future worried him much more. The subordinates loudly shouted that they had found them. As for Mangyu, his leg had already been bandaged, and one of his men was helping him walk. One of his subordinates said that the old man had died, but the child on the floor was still breathing. And that meant he wasn't dead, so they needed to get rid of him. Mangyu only grinned disgustingly and horrifyingly at these words. When Jin Jagan finally regained consciousness, Mangyu bent down in front of him, saying that the kid had finally woken up. The boy's appearance was simply terrible, with large bruises under his eyes, and his entire face covered in sweat. The boy had no idea where he was, but then a moment of horrifying realization came to Jin Jagan. He couldn't move his hands or legs at all. It was definitely not a good sign, and the boy was terrified. But just as the boy was about to ask something to the man, he was interrupted. The man said that he thought the boy would surely die after being bitten by 5,000 poisonous centipedes. That's how potent the venom of the red millipede was. However, for some reason the boy could resist the toxins. Jin Jagan cried out in desperation, asking the man where his grandfather was now. But Mangyu just chuckled softly and asked the boy if he was now asking about Sonu Wihak. Mangyu said that the old man was running away from him, but no matter how far he could run, he would still die from his poison. Mangyu grabs the boy by the jaw and says that he really wanted to kill the boy after what he dared to do to his left leg, but he had changed his mind. He thought that conducting various experiments with poisons would be much more beneficial than just killing him. Mangyu showed the boy that he was currently holding a black millipede, adding that it's not as deadly as 5,000 centipedes, but still highly venomous. Jin Jagan was horrified because he immediately recalled everything that had happened to him. Mangyu released the black millipede, which began to crawl straight toward the boy, who started screaming in fear. The man said that the boy should think about how he can't just let such a precious material go to waste. Even after being bitten by 5,000 poisonous centipedes, the boy's precious body continued to stay alive. The man sighed and told the boy not to move because the black centipede was dropping. However, upon hearing these words, the boy continued to scream in fear and panic. Mangyu angrily struck the boy's leg with his staff and yelled at him for not following his instructions to stay still. The blow was so powerful that it caused the bone in the boy's leg to crack. Mangyu chuckled, saying that children always need to be disciplined with a good beating. But then he reassured the boy not to worry because he would only be slightly crippled. The next day, Mangyu came to the boy again and said that he had been a bit cruel the day before, so he asked the boy to drink the contents of the bowl, making his task easier. Mangyu told the boy that the chanmayan soup was made from the finest ingredients. Jin Jagan, suspicious, wondered what chanmayan soup was, and remembered that it was an herbal soup that enhances the healing process and memory of a person. Immediately the boy asked why he had given him this soup. In response to the boy's question, the man said that he wouldn't be able to continue his experiment if the boy kept losing consciousness. That's why the boy needed to stay in his right mind, so that Mangyu could observe his reactions. He told the boy to be prepared that he would feed him this soup from time to time. Jin Jagan immediately began to cough because he felt excruciating pain. The man smiled and said that he had also added ague poison to the soup. Mangyu explained that he didn't want to be disappointed if the poison didn't work, so he mixed it with a cost equivalent to 10 people. Days, weeks, or months passed. The boy no longer knew how much time had elapsed since he was captured. Mangyu continued conducting experiments, feeding the boy chonmyeon soup daily. The man created countless different poisons, experimented with them, and recorded the results. Because of the chonmyeon soup, the boy would wake up every time he was poisoned and suffer from the poison repeatedly. The boy likened this to a deep, bottomless, endless hell. Mangyu wondered if it was the effect of the healing pill given to the boy by Sun Weihak, as all his ki and blood throughout his body had coagulated. The man speculated that this might be the reason the poison didn't spread as it should. But not spreading was one thing. The question was why the poison disappeared. Mangyu sighed with a smile and said that the boy was indeed an amusing experiment. The man took out a box with a venomous spider and called it a heavenly two-way widow spider. He mentioned that the Dang family in Sachin buys 5 of these spiders from them every year. Jin Jagan began to scream in agony because he was experiencing excruciating pain. Mangyu sighed and with a smile remarked on how loud the boy's screams were, even though they hadn't finished the experiment yet. The man took pride in eliciting such a reaction using only the venom of the Huanbok snake on the boy. However, the man then heard some quiet pleas from the boy. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. He begged Mangyu to save him because the poison was making it increasingly difficult for him to breathe. Mangyu was furious because right now the boy found himself in the same position as the man. Before asking for mercy, he should think twice, as he was the one who had deprived the boy of his leg. Mangyu shouted that it was because of the boy that he had become a cripple for life and had been passed over for promotion. He had turned the man, who was once the best poisoner in the poison sect in Kongho, into what he was now. Mangyu continued to berate the boy, screaming at how he could dare to do such a thing to him, ruining his entire life. Tears flowed from Jin Jagan's eyes, and foam started to come out of his mouth. By that point, his vision had clouded, and the muscles all over his body had relaxed. Mangyu stepped back from the boy's body and began to catch his breath. He had been extremely enraged and full of fury when strangling the boy, but now he had cooled down. The man wondered if the boy had already died. Mangyu immediately untied Jin Jagan's hands and cursed loudly. He took the unconscious boy's limp body and moved him to another location. Mangyu placed the boy's body on the floor and remarked that the person who survived various poisons, including the bites of 5,000 centipedes, wasn't actually poisoned by the substance he had added to his soup. It seemed that he had strangled him too hard, causing damage to his bronchi. With a chilling smile, Mangyu said that he would make sure the boy couldn't die peacefully, and that he would bring him back from the afterlife to be his toy forever. Mangyu sighed a bit wearily, and mentioned that the boy should be grateful because he had used his internal energy on him. Blood began to trickle from the boy's finger. Mangyu explained that he had punctured the pinky finger, which was connected to small acupuncture points, focusing on 100 acupuncture points. He was confident that the boy's swelling would subside once the poison drained from his finger. Mangyu said that even if the boy didn't die, the symptoms would disappear after some time. Although he noted that it would be hard to be certain the boy didn't die for other reasons, he also stated that his experimental material was incorrect. At that moment, one of his subordinates entered and reported to the captain that he needed to attend a meeting with the elders immediately. He also mentioned that an inspection party from the United Murim Alliance had arrived. Mangyu was somewhat surprised, but said he would go there right away. The man turned to the still unconscious boy with a smile and stated that he would definitely use him to the very end. The boy wouldn't be able to die or escape from him until the man himself died of old age or lightning. And so, Mangyu left his home and went about his business, leaving the boy alone. Jin Jagan continued to lie there without moving. The house fell into a dead silence, with only Mangyu's laughter echoing in the distance. But then, the boy stood up, leaning on his hands with difficulty. Blood continued to trickle from his finger. All this time, he had been pretending. By that time, Mangyu was returning to his own home. He mentioned that Pak Lichjun, the mediator of the United Murim Alliance, would come there himself, and it seemed that the director would be in a somewhat nervous mood for a while. Mangyu stated that he was creating the deadliest poison using Jin Jagan, so he just needed to wait a little longer. He approached the door to enter. Mangyu slowly crossed the courtyard in front of the house, his nose detecting a faint but unpleasant scent, the smell of poison and fish. This aroma was something unique that undoubtedly occurred inside the house. He paused in front of the door, contemplating the possible events that could lead to such an unusual combination of scents. Mangyu cautiously opened the door and entered the house. The faint smell of poison and fish was even stronger here and more unsettling. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a venomous snake lunged at him. Its eyes gleamed maliciously, and its venomous fangs were raised, ready to strike. Mangju immediately skillfully grabbed the poisonous snake by the neck. His hand trembled with tension, and his fingers clamped down in a strong but cautious grip. Mangju's eyes widened in surprise and fear of the danger that could have been his end. Sweat dripped down his face, mingling with the tension filling the air. He wondered how the snake had managed to escape. Mangju's eyes widened in astonishment. Around him, as if on command, poisonous beetles crawled. They covered the floor, walls, and ceiling. Everything was broken and overturned as if a hurricane had swept through. The boy was no longer in the spot where he had been lying. Mangju marveled at how that bastard Jin Jagan had managed to escape, especially considering his terrible condition. He couldn't understand how the boy had the strength and cunning to move and hide. His eyes, previously widened in surprise, now widened in rage. Nothing would stop him in his quest for revenge. Mangju angrily shouted, asking where that fool was hiding, and said that was the boy's answer for leaving him alive. Mangju's eyes sparkled with fury, and his fists clenched in rage. He was ready to do anything to find and punish the one who had caused him so much pain and destruction. The man realized that there should have been traces of Jin Jagan, seeing how the boy was covered in wounds. He carefully examined the surrounding space and understood that there was no evidence that Jin Jagan had left through the entrance door. Therefore, Jin could still be inside the house, hiding in some corner ready for another attack. Mangyu decisively set out to search. With anger and burning fury, Mangyu began to smash everything around in search of Jin Jagan. Vases flew from the tables, various other items shattered into pieces under the man's uncontrollable rage. His cries pierced the silence as he asked where the boy was and where he was hiding. Mangyu noticed that the lid of the hole where he disposed of various poisons had been slightly moved. His eyes fixed on this area, and he realized that it was through this passage that Jin Jagan had managed to escape. This was the key to unraveling the mystery of his disappearance. Mangyu decisively lifted the lid and began to investigate what was inside this hole, believing that there might be information or evidence that would lead him to Jin Jagan. An awful and malicious smile stretched across Mangyu's face. He mentally furrowed his brows, considering Jin Jagan an idiot for choosing to hide there of all places. His eyes gleamed with malice, and he felt confident that he was getting closer to his goal. Mangyu knew that he now had the upper hand in this game, and that his rage and persistence would eventually allow him to have his say in this dangerous game of stealth and revenge. Mangyu approached this hole. He told Jin Jagan that this hole was not the place for a person to fit through. He suggested that Jin Jagan be a good boy and come out right now. Mangyu mentioned that he and Jin still had a lot of work to do, and that the boy should understand that there was no point in hiding from him. And then, Mangyu leaned in and opened the lid of the hole, ready to unravel the mystery and find Jin Jagan. But to his surprise, a bamboo stick shot out from there, scratching him on the cheek. At that very moment, the man was overcome by excruciating pain. He immediately examined his cheek and saw that there was poison on the bamboo stick, which belonged to Jin Jagan. Understanding this circumstance made his heart freeze. It was a new twist of events that raised even more questions. Mangyu fell from his feet to his knees, his face contorted in pain, and he immediately began vomiting blood. The man was furious that this boy had decided to play dirty and kill him with his own poison. Mangyu realized that these were not symptoms that showed that he had been poisoned by one kind of poison. He just needed to find out what kind of poison it was. His eyes became blurry and blurry. A river of blood continued to pour from his mouth, staining the wooden floor. His body began to shake slightly. Mangyu began to crawl to his workstation in search of an antidote because the man had no intention of dying so soon. The man was just furious because how dare this Jin Jagan kill him in this particular way, and dare to raise his hand at all. But lo and behold, the man sees Jin Zhaogang's hand appear from the very box of snakes in front of him. Mangyu's eyes widened in shock. Then the boy himself appeared. While Jin Zhaogang was climbing out of the box full of snakes, one of them clung to the boy's left arm with its sharp teeth. But with a deft movement, Jin was able to unhook this poisonous snake from himself without wasting too much time in pain and panic. His reaction was quick and cold-blooded. Jin Zhaogang himself then threw the poisonous snake to the side. His movements were cold and full of indifference. He then looked at the dying Mangyu. His eyes expressed something incomprehensible, an inner conflict, hiding behind that cold-blooded gaze. Mangyu was shocked by the fact that Jin Zhaogang had been inside the house all this time, instead of having already escaped somewhere else. Blood continued to pour out of the man's mouth. The skin on his face turned pale, and huge blue bags and bruises appeared under his eyes. Mangju only then realized that all this time, Jin Zhigang had quietly continued to sit in the basket with the poisonous snakes. That was why one of them was able to get out of the basket and attack the man at the very beginning. Mangju was completely shocked that he was able to be so surprised by his experiment. What a cruel bastard the boy was. If things continued like this, the man's life would be in great danger. Mangjue realized that he needed to find out what kind of poison Jin Zhaogang used as soon as possible, even if the man had to tear his limbs apart. Mangjie shouted furiously and loudly that he could never forgive the boy for such a terrible and cunning act, because he had preserved his life, and the latter had dared to kill him so meanly. The boy immediately rushed out of the house, not even turning back, because he knew that the old man would suffer the same fate as his mother and grandfather. Mangier himself exclaimed the boy's name in rage before he died. Jin Jagan continued to run very fast from the house where he killed Mangyi, but immediately the boy falls on his knees and starts crying. They realized that he had just killed a man with his own hands. It was a huge trauma for him. He realized that he had just killed someone who was the enemy of his whole White Flower clan. He tilted his head and began to cry even harder, for he did not believe at all that everything that had happened to him was true. The boy really wishes that it had all turned out to be only a terrible dream. Jin Jagan cried in despair, realizing that his mother and grandfather had given their lives to save his boy, and also his entire family had died precisely because of the poison sect. The boy was completely frightened and lost, because he did not understand what he should do now. He was afraid, because now he was all alone in the world. But suddenly Jin Jagan hears someone's male voice asking what the sound was just now. The boy looks out from behind the bushes and sees two men. One of them asks what the first one means, to which the latter replies that he thought he had just heard a sound, but immediately he thinks it was just some animal. The boy continues to eavesdrop on what the two men are talking about. The man with the beard tells the bald man that it must be because they have a very important visitor today. The other men tell them that the mediator of the United Muram Alliance is coming here today. His interlocutor asks why such an important person is coming to them. The man replies to the bald man that he is probably coming to visit them personally for the reason that he just has to know how everyone works despite all the subordinates, and also says that it looks like someone from the United Muram Alliance has reported the news from the poison sect. That's why they're here, to investigate things well. The bald man immediately asks if this isn't bad for them, to which the man replies that they absolutely don't have to worry about such matters as long as their chief has a clear plan. All of this is overheard by Jin Jagan, and gets hung up on the word that there's some sort of lunchtime Muram alliance. Jin Jagan thought about it for a moment, and then memories started to pop up in his head. He remembered hearing something about a Muram United Alliance. The boy remembered his grandfather telling him about them when the Muram Dining Alliance inspection came to visit. Specifically, his grandfather told him that they were a group of rather strong and righteous warriors who belonged to all sects, great and small. The boy wonders, because is it really the case that a poison sect has come here to investigate them, and that the United Muram Alliance had heard something about them? Jin Jagan realized that this was simply the perfect and only option for him in such a situation. It was a good opportunity, so the boy decided that if absolutely had to meet with the man from the United Muram Alliance and inform him of what had happened to their White Flower clan. We are transported to the Murima Alliance lunch building. Some elder comes out to the main one, and is happy that he was finally able to find the Grandmaster. Immediately he asks him why is he standing outside and not going inside because the wind outside is very chilly. A large number of people stand in front of the Grandmaster at the same second. They bow and shout to him that they, the Poison School, are welcoming the Muram Federation General Baek Li-jun. They all obediently kneel down and praise the general, unable to defy his will. At that time, Jin Jakan has already made his way to the land of Murim and is observing from under the radar everything that is going on around him. The boy recalls what he has heard about the man, and that he is a respected gentleman who has been well known for his negligence ever since he took up his position in Ganjeo. Jin Jakan also remembered that the man has the status of a powerful and sacred sword of Baek Li-jun. And if that was true, then all the people that were members of the Poison School would then be brought out. But then the boy notices that there are two men walking nearby with torches in their hands. He hid himself, but as soon as they had gone forward a little, he quickly and stealthily ran over to the other building. Jin Jakan realized that he should do everything quickly, carefully, and not hesitate. Jin Jakan runs up to one of the windows and tries to overhear what the people inside are talking about. Namely, the general of the Murim Federation, Baek Li-jun, was there. The boy was already thinking of showing himself, but immediately stopped and started thinking about what he should say to him first. General Baek Li-jun, whom the boy had been waiting for, came into the room near the window where Jin Jakin was standing. A glint of hope immediately appeared in his eyes, and his lips stretched in a slight childish smile. Everything now depended solely on his words. But what was Jin Jakin's surprise when some poison sect elder entered the room right behind the Murim Federation general. He followed him at his heels, not lagging behind in the slightest. The boy was at a loss. He didn't understand how his plan could have gone haywire. Just then, the elder tells the general of the Murim Federation that all of their men in the Poison Clan are well trained, and that they would be useful and a good option to use as warriors for the Murim Federation. But to this, Baek Lee-jun merely takes his hands behind his back, clasping them together, and asks if his warriors were really just there. The man says that they do not exceed those now on the border in the Unnam region, and also says that the Federation is extremely concerned about this. The old man tells him that the strength of their men is excellent for the Federation, and that they should prove the same to the general himself. He asks what else they need to do. Baek Lee-jun turns to face the elder, and with a threatening look tells him that he only asked them to improve their skills, but never asked them to add more problems. Baek Lee-jun told the elder that recently a person visited them at the Unnam Federation branch. He also told them that the faction killed by the poison school had one survivor, and he thinks about the survivor being a person from the Wang house of the medical school. The elder laughed and said that this was the first time he had heard of such information. Baek Lee-jun gently placed his palm on the hilt of his sword and said to the elder in a menacing voice. The man turned to his interlocutor threateningly and told him that had the elder forgotten the presence he was in right now. Jin Jagan wondered about the Wang house, and also that wasn't the White Flower clan the only clan that had suffered at the hands of the poison school. The elder immediately whispered under his breath about apologizing to the master. Jin Jagan continued to stand there listening to what the general and the elder were saying. The boy was thinking that if he now reported how the Flower clan suffered at the hands of the poison sect, they might be able to do something to help them. The boy clenched his fist. He was determined because he wanted to do something useful. But right away, the old man answers the Murim Alliance general about how the crackdown on the people from the medical school was very uneventful. That's the reason why everything happened the way it did. The old man says that it looks like one of their White Flower clan managed to escape, thus creating a huge chaos. Baek Lee-jun turned to the elder and asked if this was all just his apology, to which he replied that it was not, and that everything he had said earlier was the truth. Baek Lee-jun immediately asks his interlocutor the following question, asking him what happened to the other survivors of the White Flower clan, to which the elder replies that they are thinking of getting rid of them all by going through an underground tunnel. The old man adds that all these people are now waiting for the one near the south gate. That area is also heavily occupied by the poison school clans, and it's for that reason that there won't be any problem to get rid of the extra people there. As soon as the elder asked Baek Lee-jun what they should do with the person who had escaped and was now in an unclear location, Baek Lee-jun replies that he has long since gotten rid of this escaped person. At this, the old man only shakes his head guiltily and apologizes to the general for causing the general so much unnecessary trouble. The boy's eyes widen at these words, and his heart begins to beat faster. Baek Lee-jun talks about how if the Federation goes after the members of the problematic faction, and in this case the escaped man from the White Flower clan, it could also be a very big problem and trouble for them, and that if they are going to crush them, then they should crush them completely, all the way down. The elder told Baek Lee-jun that it was only enough for him to clean up after him, and that this time he would do all the work much more thoroughly without missing anything. Jin Jagan was shocked to hear this because he had never imagined that the Murima Federation would be one of them involved in his clan's brutal killings of people and his loved ones. And then the boy accidentally makes a quiet sound that eventually reaches Baek Lee-jun's ears. And even so, the man was able to hear this extraneous quiet noise while the elder was telling him that they should have calmed down and taken a walk outside now. But immediately, Baek Lee-jun asked the elder to be quiet, placing his palm on the hilt of his sword. The man began to look somewhere to the side, from where a strange and quiet sound came from. At these actions of the head of Murim, the elder only looked at him with astonishment, not understanding what he wanted to do. Baek Lee-jun immediately pulled his sharp sword blade out of its sheath with a deft and quick movement, and stabbed it into the wall, piercing the wood it was made of. Right there and there stood the boy, but as expected, nothing happened. The elder shouted out what had happened and why he had done it. Baek Lee-jun started pulling the sword blade out of the wooden wall with a disgruntled look on his face. The man was certain that he had just heard some sound from that very spot, but he said that nothing had happened. The general started to put his sword back into its sheath and said that they should go for a walk after all. Jin Jagan himself stood in the same spot, breathing heavily and covering his mouth with his hand so as not to knock himself out with his loud breathing. His ribcage was really heaving and would later drop sharply. He was very scared, because if he couldn't dodge in a couple seconds, his head would be impaled. Jin Jagan, immediately after hearing the footsteps moving away from him in the distance, fell off his wadded-up legs, directly falling to the floor. The boy was dumbfounded and shocked by everything he had just heard from the mouths of Baek Lee-jun himself and the elder that spoke to him. His eyes flew open and his pupils narrowed. Sweat appeared on his forehead and sweat continued to run down his cheeks. Jin Jagan was completely unable to understand some things at this moment. Namely, why on earth the Marima Federation General Baek Lee-jun was supporting everything that the poison school was doing. The boy wondered if it was because of all the atrocities that all the people from the White Flower clan and everyone else had suffered, were killed by the poison sect, and Baek Lee-jun. Suddenly, Jin Jagan heard someone's unfamiliar voices start to echo around the corner of the building he was in. He needed to act very quickly, because if he, who was the last survivor, was caught, he would be killed with 1000% accuracy, without hesitation. And just as the boy thought, just like that, right there and around the corner were two sentinel men that were passing by and talking loudly about something. Just then, the boy's silhouette quickly sniffed somewhere inside the house, opening the door and stepping into the frightening darkness. But even better to be in the dark than to be captured and killed. Jin Jagan was frightened because he was true to the flow of his thoughts at this moment. The boy was thinking about the fact that the Murim Federation knows about all the atrocities that the poison school did. The boy was in shock from the fact they also not only turn a blind eye to all their atrocities, but also help them in all their deeds. Jin Jagan realized that it didn't matter if only General Baek Lee-jun or the entire Federation was corrupted completely. Even considering the fact that they all knew about what happened to the White Flower clan, nothing would change at all. Jin Jagan had already realized that the person who risked his life and went to the Federation was the one who had asked his people to crush them completely, and to the end, in other words, get rid of their clan. Jin Jagan was just furious because these cruel men had killed everyone stealthily like real cowards, and now they were hiding the bitter truth about it. The realization comes to the boy that all these people are exactly the same. Jin Jagan exclaims in his mind that all these people, to the last, deserve everything that is happening to them, and they also deserve to die because they took the lives of his family members. The boy sets a goal for himself that he will definitely stay alive and get stronger and stronger, without any help from the rest of the people. And then he will take revenge on them all. At the same time, the elder and General Baek Lee-jun were sitting at a large tome with some people. The old man raised his mug and asked for a little attention. After waiting for silence, he continued, saying that they were all gathered here today for one reason, and that was to greet the great warrior Baek Lee-jun. The elder says that they are here for another reason, and that is to celebrate the joyous event that took place at the poison school. The elder says that their Marima Federation general could arrive at any minute, and the fact that their general is finished will confirm their celebration. He happily raises his glass even higher. But then the elder continues by saying that they had not had such a great day in the history of their poison school. He asked everyone to raise their glasses for the ensuing joyous toast and celebration of the feast. But then, one of the subordinates enters the room and approaches the elder. He turns questioningly to the man and puts his ear to him so that he can tell him the important news secretly. The man himself begins to mutter and whisper something in his ear with a somewhat confused and angry look. At such news, the elder was at a complete loss. He rose from his seat with a quick movement in shock, resting his hands on the table. At these angry movements from his comrade Baek Lee-jun asked the old man that something was wrong. The old man awkwardly and confusedly starts laughing, and says that it's nothing, and that he has to go out for a few minutes. To these words, Baek Lee-jun replied to the elder that he understood everything, and that he also hoped that the old man was telling him the truth now, because such a significant and joyous event could not be spoiled by something extraneous. Before leaving, the elder cast a strange and mutely worried look at Baek Lee-jun and immediately left the room, walking outside to his subordinates. Right from the doorstep, the elder asks the guards what they meant by Mangyu fainting, because he didn't understand at all how such a thing could happen. To this, the subordinates only reply that from the information they got, it happened from the many different poisons that were found in his body. And they also add that there may have been some mistakes in their experiments. But to these words, the elder only replied by saying that, as he knew for certain, Mangyu had been engaged in the study of various poisons during the whole 10 years of his life, and that such a thing could never have happened, because the old man was confident of his knowledge. Oh, and besides, how could he have failed at such an important time for them? But then the elder asks the men why Mangyu had not decided to use his toy, on which he could have tested all those poisons. To which the men just open their eyes in surprise, not understanding what so-called toy they are talking about. The elder replies that he is talking about a boy who comes from the White Flower clan, and that it was Polo Manga who used him in his experiments. To this, the man replies confusedly that when they came to his house, they saw no one else near Manga. The elder was very shocked by the news he had just heard. The old man thinks that this is simply impossible to believe, because the same boy was the person who left Mangyu crippled for life. And if, according to the old man, Mangyu died, it was only during the experiment. But why wasn't the same boy who had been experimented on found next to his body? The elder immediately thought that the best solution for them right now would be to get rid of all the problems that might be the consequences of the missing boy that Mangyu had experimented on. The old man also noted in his head that if they let this boy wander around everywhere, sooner or later the story of the White Flower clan would come to light, and that would only bring them more hemorrhoids in their ass. The old man told his subordinates to go look for this boy as soon as possible, for they must definitely find this walking Mangyu experiment, because there would be dire consequences. He told the men to search everything they could around them. The elder continued by shouting that he didn't care at all what this experiment would be brought to him when he was alive, or he would be dead by then. They absolutely had to bring the boy here to him. The poison sect's military all over shouted at the people who were advancing. He was shouting at them that they were very busy with the matter at the moment, and for the people to try to keep to the schedule, so they shouldn't resist and just move forward. It was all being watched by Jin Jagan from the bushes. The boy immediately remembered what the elder and Baekli Jin had said, namely that all those survivors were sent down to the underground tunnel because it would be easier for them to get rid of them, since no one would be there at that moment. Also, they sent them to the south gate. In that place, the poison sect controls everything very carefully, so no one, no matter who it is, in the whole world, will be able to escape from there or hide. The boy remembered that it was the medical royal sect. Immediately, one of the male subordinates kicked some old man with all his might. The man immediately cried out in pain and fell to his knees. The man shouted to the old man to stop being so slow and confused behind the others, because he was slowing down everyone else behind him. Immediately afterward, his daughter runs up to the old man and with tears begins to help him up from the ground. Immediately, a man runs up to the girl and the old man, shouting loudly that the man is a man of great age and that it is already very difficult for him to move and that he is being pushed. The man also exclaims that it would be foolish to expect any sympathy from such brutal animals as this subordinate of the general. The blow came too hard for the old man. General Baekli Jun's subordinate immediately becomes angry and enraged, the veins in his face bulging and his eyebrows converging to the bridge of his nose. He tells the man that how dare he, being the sarcastic jerk he is, address him in such a disrespectful tone. The man immediately starts rolling up his sleeves for a fight and says that now this asshole is going to get a good kicking. But then another man comes up to him from behind, who was much bigger in size. He says that this is the reason why this first subordinate gets into such situations, precisely because of his temper. The first man exclaims and cries out the name of the second man who intervened in their fight or dispute. Dido himself says that all this sympathy and good words, which are superfluous, are only an indication of real men who are weak in spirit and in other indicators. A man should blame himself for that reason because at the moment he is useless and powerless. Dido immediately began to pull out his big and sharp sword from behind his back and said that it was too difficult for him to hold back now because they still had a long way to go, but that didn't negate one fact, namely that Dido's behavior only makes the man want to kill him more. He makes a sharp lunge forward, thus striking the man with his sword. But then Dido continues, saying that unfortunately, they've all been given orders to take the remaining survivors to an underground tunnel, so there's absolutely nothing they can do to help them. Dido said that he would not repeat himself twice, and that everyone here should just shut their mouths and continue on in silence to where they were told, unless they were making his job more difficult. The girl immediately turned to the man, asking him if he was all right because his cheek was cut, and the sick bastard Dido then also licked the man's blood on his sword. To that, Deputy Headmaster Young Mayan was fine even though he was slightly caught by the sword blade. Young Mian immediately took the old man under his arm and started to help him get up quickly so that he wouldn't be raised on him again. While all this was going on, Jin Jagan managed to sneak into the crowd and mingle with the people. By then, they had been traveling in the wagon for some time. There were a lot of guards around them now and then, who would definitely not let anyone escape from the wagon. But then Jin Jagan is approached by Young Myong and tells him that the boy doesn't look like someone who would belong to their sect at all. Young Mayan continues, saying that also the boy doesn't look like someone from the Diojok sect at all. The man notices that Jin Jagan looks very battered and shabby himself. There were huge bags and bruises under his eyes. To this, Jin Jagan replies that what the man said just now was true, and also continues by saying that he is the last survivor of the White Flower Settlement sect. At this, the people only stare at the boy in astonishment, unable to believe what they heard. Everyone was whispering now and then, and asking what is a person among them who is from the White Flower Settlement sect, and what is he doing here? The man responds to Jin Jagan's words with confusion, asking the boy that whether the people from the White Flower Settlement sect were also subjected to such cruel torture from the Jidoka sect. To this, Jin Jagan only shook his head affirmatively, confirming the man's words. He then asks the boy how he ended up here, to which the boy replies that after he was captured by the Jidoka sect, he was being experimented on when the mediator of the United Marim Alliance came. That's when he found a chance to escape. The man sits with some sympathy and misunderstanding. Then he replies to Jagan that he is proud that he could overcome such a way to get here, but that this wagon is not the best way out, and that this way to hell, he regrets. Jagan turns around sharply to look around and realize how many guards are around them. At this time, young Myung, sensing the boy's nervousness and realizing what his sudden movements have led to, tells him that he'd better just give up. His voice calls for reason and a peaceful resolution to the conflict, but tension hangs in the air and the fate of both men is left hanging in the balance. Jagan assesses the situation and realizes that there may not be certainty about the other guards, but Dedo's great sword is an expert, and it will be impossible to escape with it. Besides, most of them have lost their inner energy due to the poisoning from Sangong's poison. His eyes flicker with signs of anxiety, but he realizes that he shouldn't take any chances right now, and decides to follow young Myung's advice of surrendering. The boy responds by saying, "What if he has poison with him?" The man, surprised at the interjection about the poison, continues the conversation, stressing that it would be better than not having it, but he adds that the Jidoka sect specializes in poisons and is able to detoxify most of them. The conversation becomes even more tense as both men realize that they are in a difficult situation where every decision could have serious consequences. Jagan, still speaking calmly, replies that he has a very poisonous poison. At that moment, the dialogue between them becomes tense and important. Young Myung, perplexed and feeling a growing unease, asks what kind of poison the boy is talking about, wanting to understand the threat he poses. The one, undaunted, replies that it's a poison toxic enough for him to escape and make his experimenters unconscious. But more importantly, he admits that he was the one who attacked their White Flower Valley sect and killed his family. This unexpected and shocking information blows up the man's world, and his face reflects a mixture of horror and anger. The man asked, puzzled and shocked, who the man was. The answer that followed caused everyone in the wagon to be surprised, and it turned out that the man was Mang Yu, the very man who now stood before them. This discovery caused shock and bewilderment in their eyes, for they realized that they were in the presence of a man who played a double role and had secrets of his own. All the people around them begin to whisper loudly about whether this very Mang Yu, who is the chief of the Jidoka sect, and whether the boy was able to defeat him alone. But immediately, all their voices are interrupted by a man who asks everyone to keep their voices down and then stop talking altogether. There is an order and a demand for respect for the situation in his voice, and everyone listens attentively, suspending their conversations. Young Mayan turns to Jin Jagan again and asks him where the poison he talked about a little earlier is, to which the boy scuffs up the sleeve of his clothes on his hand and bites himself on the nail on his pinky finger with force. The boy told the man that the poison was right there in his body. Young Mayan was shocked and greatly surprised. Even so, the man could see that it was true just by looking at the appearance of Mang Yu's pinky finger. It was secreting some strange liquid that came out in an overly large dosage, hinting at danger and poisonousness. It was a discovery that made the situation even more mysterious and dangerous. Eventually, the man came to the conclusion that pure toxin was coming out of his little finger, and that it was definitely the deadliest poison he had ever seen. Young Myung cried out in surprise to the boy and asked him how he could keep something so poisonous and toxic in his body without causing his body and insides any harm or damage. The question was so mysterious and surprising that even the experienced man was on the verge of bewilderment and horror, realizing that something incredible and mysterious was before him. Jin Jagan replied to young Myung that he had had to eat poisonous insects of various kinds in the course of an experiment in which he had participated, and also says that when their village was attacked, he had to eat 5,000 red, deadly, and poisonous centipedes, and even after so many of his unsuccessful attempts, he could not die from any of the deadly poisons. And knowing of this amazing and mysterious ability of the lad, Mang Yu experimented on him and fed him day after day, while he was in his confinement, a great number of different kinds of poisonous insects. And it was then that he developed the ability to secrete poison from his body. Young Mayan was simply dumbfounded and amazed by the boy's words, and immediately asked him if he could do a little examination on the boy's body, with his own permission. After all, Jin Jagan does allow a man to do that. Young Mayong himself notices some strange things while examining the boy's body, namely that all the meridians in the boy's body are blocked, but his danchan, stomach, and even his pinky finger are the only meridian pathways in the body. Also, Young Mayong guesses that all the Dianchan Jinjagan energy in his own body is the most toxic and poisonous poison. Young Myung recoils from the boy as soon as he finishes his inspection on Jinjagan and tells him that his body is very unusual. The man tells the boy that he doesn't know the real reason why this is happening to him, but all the pain and suffering the boy has had to endure has given him this same blessing to the poisons. The man also adds that the poison that was collecting in the boy's body through Dian Tian was somehow able to seep through his meridians on his little finger. Jin Jagan immediately responds to Young Myun and says that they should use his newly acquired ability for a common goal, namely to escape from this place, and most importantly, to survive. But the girl sitting across from them interrupts the boy and tells him what will happen if their plan fails, because the child may not be able to defeat all the guards around him. The girl continues by saying that if Jin Jagan's plan doesn't work out, they'll just waste their time and energy, and worst of all, they'll all end up dying a miserable dog's death. She also exclaims that Jin Jagan and Young Mayan aren't thinking too much about running away from here because it won't be as easy as they say it will be. Just then, some other man joins in on the girl's words, who had previously only sat quietly and listened to what the others around him were saying. He also expressed his displeasure, saying that he agreed with what the girl had just said, because they were all heading for the mines anyway. Which meant that at least they wouldn't die, and it was better to live that way than to die at all. The man also compliments by saying that, sure, working in the mines can be very hard, but in a good way, it at least ensures that they have some chance of surviving, and that what good would it do if he died? Then someone says that's the truth of it, because what good is it if you just die a miserable death? Jin Jagan to all these words only asked if the people around him had finished expressing their displeasure about their plan, to which the man answered him in incomprehension as to what the boy meant. But the girl squealed again addressing Jin Jagan with words to tell him to think hard, and whether what he was planning to do right now was realistic, because the whole affair was very risky for all the people at the same time. The girl suggested that they safely shelve the idea and think about how they would escape then when they could still get to the tunnels. But to these words of the girl, Jin Jagan replied that all their lives would end at the same time at the exact moment they reached the underground tunnels. The boy asks the girl what is the point of only continuing to live like a rat underground, on the condition that if they can only live a few years more than usual, rather than being killed at once. A dead silence immediately rose around the people. Everyone realizes that what the boy said was completely out of character for his age, and that he was completely right. Young Mayan immediately breaks the silence and says that everything Jin Jagan just said is the absolute truth, and that they can't stay here a moment longer. Young Mayan also says that if they had come to the tunnels, it's unlikely they'd all be able to do anything useful there. Young Mayong continued by saying that if they had listened to the girl and come there, it would have been their fatal mistake. And right now, the boy's ability could be the perfect and only chance for them to have any salvation at all, since their health is already very not bad, even though they are all exhausted and their number of enemies is quite low. Just then, young Mayong turns to the boy and asks him what his name is, and if he wouldn't mind cooperating with them all for their overall survival. The man asks that the boy provide them with his help, and they will also help him get out of here in return. He gets a positive response from the boy, and they immediately begin to get acquainted. Young Mayan tells the boy that it seems like it's time for his introduction, and the man says his name is Young Mayan, and that he is the deputy director of the Medicine King sect. The boy told the man that his name was Jin Jagan. Young Mayan looks at the boy with a smile, and tells him that it seems that Jin Jagan was able to help open their eyes to the situation they were all in, for which they are very grateful to him. If it wasn't for his words, they would have headed to the Alliance to report the incident, if the boy hadn't decided to tell them about the betrayal after all. But Jin Jagan only responds to these words by saying that they haven't even started putting their plan into motion yet, and that they haven't even successfully escaped yet. To this, young Mayan replies that he's just saying all this to the boy for the reason that he doesn't want a mischievous life, so he's very grateful to him. But all of a sudden, there is a loud shout from afar from some guards telling the cart with people to stop. The subordinates shout to the people that the director himself is ordering them to turn their cart around and go back to their sect. Young Mayong shrieked in surprise at the boy and asked him how he could keep something so poisonous and toxic in his body without causing any damage to his body and insides. The question was so mysterious and surprising that even the experienced man was on the verge of bewilderment and horror, realizing that something incredible and mysterious was before him. Voices echoed in the air like this, which for the second time repeated the command to the cart to turn around and drive back to the sect they had nailed down. Dado looked back with interest and saw his companions, the general's henchmen on horseback, shouting to him that the higher men were beginning to go mad already. The man adds that Elder Mangyu had long since fainted, and that also one of the captives had escaped from his house, which was Mr. Mangyu's experiment. They immediately shouted out to him that Director Baek Lee Jin ordered them to find that person for them as soon as possible. Dido only looked at the man with a surprised expression and exhaled in disbelief. He asked him if that experiment of his could really do something so terrible to Mangyu-san. To which he immediately replied that although it had not yet been proven, all the evidence suggested that it was the survivor who had done it. Dido sighs and tells them that the old man isn't the same old man he used to be, and that even now he's a cripple without a leg, so he's not really surprised that he's weakened so much. The same man tells Dido that right now, in this wagon full of people, is the same escaped survivor from the White Flower Village, and that they should search it immediately to find the imposter. The sudden discovery creates tension in the wagon, and everyone's eyes turn to the man in question. The situation becomes even more complicated, and everyone waits for developments, preparing for possible conflict. Jin Jagan was immediately approached by young Mayan, who leaned forward anxiously, and the boy himself followed suit. It was harder to see their faces because they were sitting in a bent posture. Dado, meanwhile, asks the male snitch what the one who escaped from Mr. Mangyu looks like. The man replies to him that he is certainly not sure of his guesses, and also says that he definitely hasn't heard the details. It is for this reason that they need to turn the wagon around to be able to examine all the people. The men talk about the fact that it will not be easy at all to check everyone, because whether they really think that they will be able to check all this wagon on this narrow way among the mountains and the forest. And besides, they are trying not to give the Alliance General any more trouble, and what will happen if they don't do the job after turning back the wagon. And only the man thought to object, but Dido decided to suggest some other idea that he thought was more effective. Dido asked his subordinate how many total people should be in the wagon, to which he heard the answer that there should be a total of 11 people inside. Dido sighs tensely, and tells the man that if there are not 11 people in the wagon, they will just leave the place as soon as possible. Immediately, Dido asks if it was possible that one of the family members could have taken their place. Dido started counting quickly and pointing his index finger at the people in the cart. All the passengers began to get very anxious and panicked. An atmosphere of tension and fear engulfed everyone, and everyone was terrified of the possible consequences of this unexpected test. Some hid their heads in their knees like ostriches, trying to escape from fear, and others continued to sit, looking with horror into each other's eyes, waiting for a solution to this tense situation. But suddenly, the man's face changes dramatically, and he says with a horrified smile that someone alone in the wagon is obviously superfluous. Dido smiled slyly, as if he knew something the others didn't, and said that how could it happen that there were more than 11 people in the wagon, with a smirk on his face. Then, a completely different subordinate of the Murim Alliance General shouted, saying that how the prisoner had managed to escape and be among them. Dido immediately drew his sharp and large sword, giving an imposing and threatening impression. He stood there, confident in himself and his ability to handle this situation. His sword was ready for action, and now, thanks to that, they didn't have to head to the tunnel as they had a good reason to discuss the situation right here and now in front of them. And it was all because they had some business that they simply couldn't put off their investigation and head to the tunnel. Right now there was a traitor sitting in the wagon, and they had to get rid of him as soon as possible. Jagan began to panic, his mind contemplating a plan of action, for the poison that was in his body was not omnipotent. That's why he needs a strategy that is superior to his opponent. It was for this reason that the guy realized that he should be more careful this time. But the Jidok sect acts much faster than Jin Jagan could expect. Suddenly, young Myung took hold of the boy's shoulder and nodded his head, as if to let him know that he had an idea or a solution. That moment filled Jagan with hope, and he expected to hear a suggestion that would help them in this dangerous situation. In the background, however, one of the men was simply shaking with fear. He couldn't deal with the animal fear he was feeling at the moment. The man, suddenly feeling very anxious and fearful, abruptly stood up and said that despite his fear, the person who had escaped from the White Flower clan was right here and now in the carriage. The sudden and shocking information caused even more tension and excitement among the passengers, and everyone waited to see how this unexpected situation would develop. Suddenly, the same man cries out that the guy just came and disappeared in the wagon without asking anything at all from all of them. The man cries out in desperation that they would only give him to them if they let them go alive. The boy looked with horror and misunderstanding at the man. It was the same boy. But Dado didn't care, and he immediately swung his sword and cut the man in half from his left shoulder to the right side of his stomach. All the people were shocked by what they saw, and the faces of the passengers reflected horror and disgust. The situation became even more tense and dangerous, and there was an eerie silence in the carriage, interrupted only by the sounds of breathing and heartbeats resounding in horror. One of the guards exclaimed to Dido about what he had just done, and that they could get at least a little more information from the man. Dido replied that he was on his way when things started to get interesting, and that he would be sure to inform the director that these men were trying to hide the prisoner, and in any case, death was the end for them. However, the guard wanted to continue his objections, but the woman from the wagon interrupted him. She shouted in agony and a fit of anger that they were like animals, acting like real beasts. She asked how human life could be treated as if it were no more than a fly, and expressed her rage at the inhuman acts that had occurred at that moment. The entire crowd began to support the woman by shouting and expressing their rage. The people shouted loudly that if this was the case, then let Dado kill them all, and that heaven would then punish him very severely. Dado replied that even if they didn't ask him to kill them, it would still happen, and one person wouldn't change the situation. Someone in the crowd shouted again that it was time for them to start their plan right now. From the wagon, the guards were attacked by men with something sharp in their hands. They acted quickly and deftly, creating chaos and panic among the guards. The situation was tense and dangerous, and the fight for survival in this tense wagon began. Dido feigned surprise and sighed with a chuckle as if surprised by the turn of events. A subordinate of the Murim Alliance general put his weapon to the guards' foreheads and started screaming, accusing them all of being bastards and that they really thought something like this would work. He then loudly ordered them all to die. After saying these words, the man slit his enemy's throat and flung his body away. One of the guards responded by shouting that they were all just trash and asked how they were able to kill all these people. He then began coughing out a large amount of blood and calling out for Dado, but the man stared at him silently, showing no emotion. The situation became even more tense and chaotic in this wagon, where the struggle for survival became fierce. The servant of General Murimsky turned sharply to one of the men who had earlier run out of the wagon and expressed his anger at how he even dared to kill one of their men. The anger overwhelmed him as they were, in his opinion, losing to their opponents. His eyes glittered with rage, and his fists clenched on the bridge of his nose, and his veins ballooned with tension. The situation was getting more and more heated, and the tension in the wagon was rising. The same man who just a few seconds ago was screaming that they were going to kill everyone suddenly hesitated and fell to his knees. He started vomiting his own blood, and it was a gruesome and horrible sight. Dado watched this pathetic picture, but his face remained indifferent. It was quite clear to the man that his comrade was slowly and painfully dying right before his eyes, and the situation was becoming increasingly tense and chaotic. While the other soldiers and subordinates of the Murim Alliance general were running away from their enemies in fear, unable to understand how this could happen, Dido remained motionless in his seat. He pondered on how they were able to kill so many of their men so quickly and efficiently. One of the men who had returned to Dido upon seeing the scene taking place turned around again and, gripped by fear, galloped off for reinforcements. The head of the provosts decided to assess the situation and noticed that the weapon the captives were attacked with was a broken piece of china that was in the wagon. However, the ulamak itself could not have caused such an injury. It is known that if an opponent faints after being scratched, the captives approached the head of the escort, holding their ulamas in their hands, and warned him that it was now his turn. To this, Dido replied with certainty that even earthworms wriggle if you step on them and nothing changes. He added that when you realize that your opponent has poison, you have to put some distance between yourself and him while smiling. The situation remained tense and dangerous, but Dido did not lose his cool, and he was ready to act according to his plans. Despite the situation and the danger, Dado remained calm as he realized that his opponents had been using poison all along. He slowly raised his sword and said that he just might. Everyone in the wagon tensely waited to see what would happen next. With a swing of his sword, he slashed vertically at the man named Sapyong, and then licked the blade of his sword. He then explained that his sword was not an ordinary sword, but a key sword. This announcement caused bewilderment and fear among the opponents, and they realized that they were facing a man with a powerful artificial technique. Dido only licked his sword. Someone rushed towards Dido, and that someone turned out to be Jagan, who swooped down from behind the still licking sword. Jagan was sneaking up on him stealthily to strike back, while Dido talked about how this was the way to finish unfinished business. Just then, Jagan appeared behind Dido and was already swinging over his head to poison him with poison. The situation became extremely tense, and many began to wait to see how this fight would unfold. We are transported to a time when they were still preparing for the plan itself and coming up with it. Young Mion talks about how everyone should realize that everyone here has a risk of dying, and that the very problem lies in the fact that they won't be able to defeat the same Dando because his sword and determination will be much stronger than theirs combined. Also, Jagan tells the man that he's saying the right things, and that's why it would be more beneficial for them to use exactly that poison on him. But Yun Myung says that he'll figure out pretty quickly that they're using poison as a weapon. That was why Young Mayon suggested that they all become decoys until the time was right for Jagan's surprise attack. The plan was to get Dido's attention and keep his attention on them until the boy aimed precisely at Dido's neck. It was a dangerous and risky plan, but they had no other choice, and hoped that they could stop Dido and prevent his terrible intentions. But after some time and heavy losses, they still managed to help Jagan get close to Dido and damage his neck. Jagan's strike was accurate, and immediately, a small path of blood appeared at the site of the cut. Jagan was already rejoicing inside himself because he had finally managed to snag his opponent and use his poison, which was his main weapon, on him. The man himself continued to stand there and didn't worry about anything at all because he was already prepared for such a move from his opponent. Dido didn't show any signs of pain or panic. He only looked at Jagan with a cold and indifferent gaze, as if it was just a small injury in the form of an imperceptible scratch. In this situation, each of them was prepared for extreme danger, and their battle was just beginning. Dido himself said with disappointment in his head, because he was so disappointed that this was the plan that people had been preparing for such a long time while sitting in the wagon. Dido immediately turns around to face Jagan, who was standing behind him, and said that they would never be able to pierce his tough-as-metal skin with the strength of a 5-year-old child. Dido immediately pierces Jagan's body with his sword with a precise blow. The boy's blood began to pour everywhere, staining the grass and ground beneath him. Dido himself said that he could not have expected that out of all those in the wagon, such a small child would jump out at him. And yet the man praises him, saying that Jagan was very good at hiding and sneaking up on the man in order to hit him in his weak spot, namely his neck. But immediately Dido sticks out his tongue and says something that is all he can praise the boy for in everything else he was a weak child without a gram of strength. The man pointed his sword at the boy, asking him what his last words would be. Jagan himself was thinking that everyone here would definitely die just because the boy would die, so he had to do something else to save other people. All the people who had been in the wagon up to that time were furious that Dido had just killed a little boy without remorse. They were yelling time and time again that he had killed a child, and that he was absolutely no better than some animal. But Dido didn't care at all about their words, and he just stood there and licked the blood on his sword. His equanimity and indifference made the people around him even more indignant. A sly smirk immediately appeared on Dido's face, and as soon as he swung his sword through the air, a huge explosion was heard. Pieces of the huge rock they were standing on flew apart, and the air currents blew away everything in their path. It was extremely powerful and destructive, and everyone around them was amazed by its power and destructive force.